Good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. My name is Kayla Isabel, and I'm the CEO here at Startup Canada. I am so delighted to welcome all of you here today for our second Startup Gov event of Small Business Week. Welcome, welcome, welcome. To begin, I would like to acknowledge that the land on which I am on today is located on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. I also acknowledge with respect the diverse histories and cultures of all Indigenous peoples. We take a moment to encourage all of you to also take a moment to acknowledge the land that you are residing on today. Today's event, as part of Startup Gov, formerly called Startup Canada Day on the Hill, is one of Startup Canada's flagship programs with a strong mandate to provide every single entrepreneur with a voice to government and really create the conditions needed for entrepreneurial success all across Canada. It has been so inspiring and really moving to be privy to some of these conversations since launching the program this past July. Now, during Small Business Week, we are honored to further illuminate the themes and topics that we've covered through many of those events and share them through our curated programs this week. None of this would be possible, however, without the key ecosystem partners that bring this program to life, including our co-presenting partners, UPS and Intuit QuickBooks, our national partners, MasterCard, BDC, and the Trade Commissioner Service, our community partners, Scotiabank, Google, NACA, and the Village Hive, and last but not least, our event partner, Magnet. Thank you so much to each and every one of those partners for supporting the effort in championing the needs of Canada's entrepreneurs to government. The event that all of you are tuned into today is called Through a Women's Lens, Hurdles in Entrepreneurship. And we're going to be focusing on the challenges women entrepreneurs face, how the pandemic has exacerbated these challenges and issues, and how we can move forward to create a more inclusive and more equitable ecosystem for women to thrive. We are really proud to be partnered with the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce as well to bring this panel to life today. Here today to moderate today's session is a good friend of Startup Canada and a good friend of mine, Nancy Wilson. Nancy is the founder and CEO of the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce and a chartered professional accountant. After experiencing a lack of resources, difficulty finding connection, and numerous barriers, both as a business owner and indirectly through many of her clients, Nancy launched the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce in January of 2018. She has been working ever since to create a powerful network to inform a new strategy for women in business and drive long-lasting change. I think we can all get behind that, Nancy. Thank you so much for everything you do, Nancy. I'll pass the virtual stage over to you.
Thanks so much, Kayla. I'm so happy to be here moderating this fantastic event and partnering with Startup Canada for this Startup Gov event. So I just want to go back a little bit to late March, early April 2020, which was a very scary time for a lot of us. The lockdown had just occurred, and one of the first actions or projects that the Canadian Women's Chamber of Commerce, or CanWCC as we call it, one of the first projects that we undertook was to create a survey that looked at the impacts of the lockdown and the pandemic on not only women identified entrepreneurs, but all underserved populations, or as many populations as we could really access. So we partnered with a variety of different organizations and groups, including Startup Canada. And Startup Canada really helped us get that survey out there through their network to so many people. And we created that survey in partnership with these groups and organizations to really look at the impacts of the pandemic and the lockdown with an intersectional lens applied. So why am I telling you about all this? So we're going to reference, or I will reference, the results of that survey a couple of times during the panel conversation. And although data points, percentages, results of the survey, they can tell a story, they can paint a picture. And government loves data. So, I mean, this was a very important project that we undertook. data doesn't compel us to action. It doesn't evoke emotion or empathy within us. Human connection is really required for that type of action or reaction, rather. So that's why it's so important to pair all of the reports, surveys, articles that we read about the impacts of the pandemic, the impacts of not only the pandemic, but the barriers that different populations and groups face in their journey to achieve their goals. We need to pair that somewhat dry information with the real stories of individuals and what they're experiencing or have experienced. And that's what we're going to do today. So I'm very excited to be here, and I'm happy to introduce the panelists. So our first panelist is Jen Denowden, President and CEO of Avana. We have Vanessa Terran. She is the owner of Tea Services. Next is Joella Hogan, owner of the Yukon Soaps Company. And Janelle Sobey, CEO and co-founder of Riddle. And finally, we have Mandy Potter, Canadian Entrepreneur of the Year and Head of Growth at Duoplane. Welcome, everybody. And this is a great sort of panel of women to explore some of the socioeconomic impacts and to really bring life to those topics. Before I ask the first question, I want to say to all of the attendees, everyone who's listening, first of all, thank you so much for spending time with us today to participate in the panel by listening. And we also want you to participate by submitting any questions you have through YouTube. So that's how you can submit your questions. We're going to have a little bit of time at the end of sort of the more structured panel question period to where I can ask the panelists some of your questions that you submit. So the first question I'm going to ask is about childcare. I mean, how can we have a panel with women without asking about childcare, right? We cannot. So, but it is an important topic. So in that survey that I referenced before, one of the major findings was that 53% of women respondents reported that they were spending additional time on childcare versus 12% of male respondents. So that's a huge gap. And it's not terribly surprising because we've had data before showing that women tend to take on more childcare, and caretaking responsibilities than men. So I want to ask the panel, how has childcare or a lack of childcare impacted your experience as an entrepreneur? Mandy?
Yeah, so I have a unique perspective on this just because me and my partner are expecting a child, but we don't have a child yet. I think the first issue is that if this were a men's roundtable, childcare wouldn't even be a topic of discussion, kind of like you mentioned. And so as two moms or two soon-to-be moms, we have to equally think about childcare in my family and how it's going to affect our careers. So my partner works in film. She's freelance. She doesn't get parental leave. She doesn't qualify for a lot of programs, as we all know as entrepreneurs. Unfortunately, in a lot of situations, banks don't like us when we're entrepreneurs trying to get a mortgage. Government doesn't like us. We're exempt from EI. Lots of different situations like that. So for us to have a kid, we had to build a large savings, ensure that my salary can pay for all three of us. And I think that, my kid hasn't popped out yet, but I do know a lot of people who've had children through the pandemic. There's a lot of relationships where typically the woman is still giving up something on her end to stay home. She is working from home. She's providing childcare. She's homeschooling. I know many friends that, their mental health and their physical health really declined because of that through the pandemic. And unfortunately, women have to outweigh the costs of success sometimes in terms of personal sacrifice. So we're always asking ourselves the question, are we going to choose our career over a family? And we need to make that question a lot easier for women to answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Jen, I know you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I think, have a unique experience with childcare and with being a mom as an entrepreneur, because I started my business when I had one baby, and then I had 3 more babies within 47 months. So, and it's interesting because the reason why I actually wanted to start my own business was I just couldn't imagine going back to my 60-hour work weeks. I had a professional career in banking prior to becoming a mom. So that's why I decided actually to start. And I think that without having childcare options, Avana, as we know it today, wouldn't be what it is. I was very fortunate in that I had a mom who was willing to early retire and come help me with my kids. And I had a husband who took parental leave with our 3rd and with our 4th. And I had the privilege to have those options. And if I would not have had the privilege to have those options, I would probably own my company, but I wouldn't have scaled it. Okay. And so often this is a common theme that we see with women entrepreneurs. We're finally starting to see more women entrepreneurs, but we don't often see women be able to scale their businesses. It's, due to a lot of different reasons, lack of funding and lack of childcare. And often women will choose the care of their children over success and over scaling. And so my ability to scale our business, I can proudly say we were the 10th fastest growing company in Canada last year for the growth list. But I can honestly say that wasn't because of me. That was because of the resources and the help that I had through my family connections, which I realize not everybody has. So the recently announced childcare funding and changes through the federal government, I think, is absolutely critical and necessary for the future of women entrepreneurs. And I'm really excited to see the socioeconomic impacts of those programs once they're rolled out, because it shouldn't be so hard to fulfill the motivation and inspiration that we as female entrepreneurs feel within us. And I think that will get easier over the years. But it for sure is a crucial issue that needs to continue to be looked at.
Absolutely. And, having a strong support network is absolutely one of the things that makes it possible for women to start a business, to have a business. And, over 80% of the lone parents or single parents in Canada are women. So when you think about that, not having a second parent in the house, I mean, that just makes it so much tougher, right?
Absolutely.
So, I mean, Mandy and Jen both touched on the issue of mental health. And so in the survey, we also found significant impacts on mental health, which is not surprising with all of the changes and going on during the lockdown and pandemic. 71% of survey respondents reported negative mental health impacts or negative mental health consequences as a result of the pandemic, the lockdown. And of course, social distancing and the lockdown impacted the accessibility of mental health resources and the ability for folks to access assistance with what was going on in terms of mental health. So I want to ask some folks on the panel, if they're comfortable sharing their experience during the pandemic, what resources were available to them, and what weaknesses or strengths they feel were a part of their mental health experience during the lockdown. Janelle?
Yeah, when the pandemic happened, I was still juggling my previous company. So I had a services company, which I'm sure you can all appreciate was difficult as soon as the pandemic hit. And then a new startup, which is Riddle, and it's a software product company. And so at the beginning of the pandemic, already having to juggle two companies and needing to navigate all of the quick decisions that needed to be made in terms of how you envisioned not just what was going to happen tomorrow, but what needed to happen over the next few weeks, months. And at that time, I wasn't predicting that it was going to be a full year and a half. I mean, we're coming up on 2 years now of needing to revamp your entire company plan. And so I would say what I did to I guess, try to keep structure and maintain my mental health was to build a routine. But when I look back now, what I didn't recognize is that I was definitely burnt out from the previous company and trying to juggle both during a transition period. And I just kept going. So just kept, attending the meetings, pushing as hard as we could, moving forward with what we thought were going to be, with the plans that we thought were still going to happen, or at least trying to pivot and figure out how we were still going to deliver upon our goals. And I very quickly realized, and I think everyone, whether, you're an entrepreneur during a pandemic, or you're a woman entrepreneur during a pandemic, or you're just an entrepreneur and there's no pandemic and you're not a woman, I think every entrepreneur needs their friends and family to check in with them periodically and say, like, hey, are you okay? And I don't know if people checked in with me early enough or soon enough to give me the support and or at least help me acknowledge that it wasn't okay. So I think what I did was I just kept moving forward, but I did hit burnout. So what I learned from the pandemic as a result, and I actually think like I'm incredibly grateful for it, for my mental health, that the pandemic happened, was because it did allow for me to take a step back, have a lot more focus when it comes to the business, required milestones, what needs to happen, determine the most efficient ways for how we get there, both in resourcing, capacity, capital efficiency, but personally as well. And so it was the first time in probably over a decade that I started to reconsider my mental health and how I show up at work and how I show up for my team. And it led to a lot of significant changes. So even today, I no longer set an alarm clock. I haven't since COVID happened. I quit caffeine. And there was a lot of other small changes like that were personal, that really, really positively impacted the way I show up in my company today. And I would say, like, the biggest, again, whether you're in a pandemic or not, I think the biggest thing an entrepreneur has to keep in mind is it's really about one step in front of the other, and knowing, okay, I've got my vision, I know where I'm headed, and be confident in, I'm going to keep making the best decisions every day, and eventually I'm going to get to where I'm going. And so I think that's really helpful to keep in mind, that you'll just get there. You'll get to your goal if you just keep taking a step every day.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Joella? Sorry, your sound was a bit off. Do you mind starting again?
Yep. Am I good now?
Yes. Good.
Okay. Yeah, so absolutely, mental health is also an epidemic in this country. And certainly in the North, there's already a lack of mental health support in Northern Indigenous communities. And our resources and infrastructure is already so limited and under capacity to deal with trauma, colonial violence, and the impacts of residential school. And so it often, at the personal level, seemed seemed hard to reach out when our system is already so tapped up here in the Yukon. And so for me personally, I was dealing with so many unknowns in my personal and private life, and was so grateful to have my community. I live in a small village of only 400 people in northern Yukon, and so, great friends and family, and also the support of elders, to continue to wrap in love and reach out when I really need it. But I think also I was able to have online support that pretty quick into the pandemic. I was invited to join an Indigenous Women's Business Leadership Forum, which is now called the Lift Collective. And we met every Sunday for so many months, and we laughed and cried, and we shared resources and tools, and we just sat with each other and were able to, kind of find our way through this with so many unknowns. And I think that it was the combination of that support that I had in my little community, but also that online support that was able to get me through the last year and a half, I guess, through all of those highs and lows. And I think, eventually I was able to gain the confidence to speak out about where I was at with my mental health journey. And so, posting online and sharing, and, just being able to do that and encourage others to also seek help when they need it. And it really is only just recently, within the last month, I guess, that I have been able to make my mental health more of a priority and to make big changes in my life to address that and put that first, because really I'm not supporting anybody else in my community or in my business if I don't take care of myself. And so I think, up here in the north, in terms of what we need for our mental health, is supporting communities with the financial resources to design our own mental health programs so that we can deal with that. So whether that's women in general, entrepreneurs, and just communities, and that we need to create the space within companies and government so that people can access culturally relevant tools for mental health. The systems and resources that we do have that are limited aren't always what we need in the communities. And I think, always encouraging people to connect with elders and bringing elders and those cultural supports into workplaces also. And that we really need to be able to, like I said with myself, focus on ourselves and our communities. And so in the north, we have so many big development projects happening, and communities are asked a lot, and especially as a small business, I'm asked to provide a lot of input into bigger projects. But if we're not taking care of our own mental health, individual and personal well-being, then we can't contribute to the bigger, economic ecosystem.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, there's so many different ways and methods to help people. And, there's not one channel or one methodology, excuse me, that's right for everybody. So, exploring and providing resources across the board that are so that people can really find something that speaks to them is essential. Thanks, Joella, for that. I'm going to turn it over to Mandy, who I know has some something to share with us, which is really important.
Yeah, thank you. I think that what we're kind of getting to right now is that with mental health, which we're all very aware, is there's a huge lack of accessibility. And usually it's the most privileged ones, unfortunately, that can get that help through, having the finances to actually afford it, whatever that might look like. At the beginning, right before the pandemic fully hit in February 2020, I actually moved back to San Francisco. I got into an accelerator there. And it was around that time that everyone was talking about border closures. And so we made the decision to come back. And we got back home at 5 a.m. And at 8 a.m. I woke up in excruciating pain. And I actually ended up a month in the hospital, life-threatening condition. Obviously wasn't able to run my business. I ended up going through a 9-month recovery period through that time. And so it wasn't just that my mental health was probably the worst it's ever been during that time. Partially due to the pandemic. Obviously, in the hospital, I had to be completely alone. Didn't have any help. But also, it's changed my life so much because I had to personally pivot. So I got to a point where I started my first company when I was 19. I've always ran my own companies. And it got to a point where the stress was too much on me that I guarantee that was part of the reason why I got so sick. And so I pivoted in a way where I had to start thinking about, okay, being an entrepreneur is so important to me. Like, it's who I innately am, but what can I do that where I can still shine through with that, but also be healthier? And so I actually made the decision to join my first company ever after I recovered. And so I made a huge pivot with that. And I had to take a lot of steps towards taking care of my health for honestly the first time since I was a teenager, where, you know, I work out every day and I eat clean and I have to do all these things. Whereas before I'm working 7 days a week, 14-hour days, and that's not sustainable. It really isn't. And I think that as entrepreneurs, there's this really toxic culture of hustle culture that it's not a good thing. It's not a golden badge of honor. It really isn't. And I used to think it was. But when it comes, it's really important that we have balance in our lives. And I learned that through this whole pandemic.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's really, that sounds like a really, really difficult journey. And I'm glad that you came, you're healthy now, or at least, your health seems better, which is great. I want to ask Vanessa a specific question just for her, because she's in a unique situation where she actually started her company during the pandemic, which is, in my estimation, an incredibly brave thing to do. And she did it for a very specific reason. Can you tell us a bit about that, Vanessa?
Absolutely. Well, I think I also wanted to give my opinion regarding mental health because,
of course, sure, yeah.
Many of us, it's such a huge topic. My main, going back to my story, I immigrated on my own at the age of 17. Very similar to Mandy, I have like the entrepreneurship on my veins, and I have always done things. I have different startups, but nothing really concrete as like actually incorporated my own business. So 2 years ago, I decided to bring my parents. Even though they're my parents, I'm the household of not only my family here, but also my family back home. So that created a huge pressure on me as a young entrepreneur who just recently got laid off from her full-time job. And besides, all the different situations that I didn't have a full-time income, and I saw myself with all these different opportunities, that's the reason why we cannot lose contact with people, even though we're in a pandemic, because I guess like networking with different people brought me the idea of creating what is today the T services, which is cleaning janitorial services, which we do residential, boats, and commercial. So some of my friends were like, well, why don't you provide your parents, like cleaning our boats? And it came out very well. And I guess I'm very thankful for my background and all the experiences, the knowledge of my career, that I was able to really see the bigger picture, that I didn't want only to, make profit for the company, but also being able to actually help my community that is really newcomers, because they're my parents, but they're newcomers to the country, because having them here and helping them immigrated on their own at the age of like 60 have really put me in a very vulnerable place on that sector, because besides the pandemic struggles, immigrants that come here that they don't know the English, they don't know how the economy works, they don't know business, they don't have any contact. Some people come on their own. Thankfully, my parents had me here. So I think that was my big motto to open the business and to keep running it. That's my motivation today.
That's fantastic, Vanessa. I'm glad you had some camera issues early on in the panel. So I just want to say that, which is why we weren't able to hear from Vanessa earlier, but thank you so much for sharing that. And I think it really speaks to sort of the passion that a lot of us have when we start our business. It's not just about making a buck, although let's face it, we have to pay our bills. So of course it's about making a buck. And I don't want to sort of dramatize this idea that we're out there saving the world. We need to make money, just like everybody else. But a lot of our businesses are started with an idea in mind to really help people, whether it's our community, our specific population, or to build a product or a service that just puts better things into the world. I hear that from women every day, so that's fantastic. So our last question before we move on to some audience questions is around pivoting, and this is a touchy topic for me. So, the gold standard over the past 2 years, the gold standard advice for entrepreneurs or business owners has been to pivot, just pivot. And so what's pivoting? Change your business model, change your products, change your suppliers, change your service delivery, whatever it is, in order to adapt to the pandemic. But, pivoting takes expertise, resources, capital, so who is really in a position to pivot on a dime, right? So my question to the panel is, do you feel like pivoting what is or was a helpful piece of advice to you? And, are you in a position, or do you feel like you want to pivot your business? Is that something that you are prepared to do? And do you have the sufficient resources to do it? So I'm going to ask Vanessa to weigh in.
So for my case, given the fact that I opened up my business during the pandemic, for me was very beneficial because I definitely did a huge study on the industry. I'm in the janitorial services, so it's a very high demand. But even though, yes, there's high demand, there's a lot of competition nowadays. So I needed to offer, and I needed to change the strategy on, okay, how can I reach out to them? How can I provide them more value? I didn't really do much pivoting just because I'm in the early stages of my business. But something that I definitely did is focusing on my branding, which is my own story, which is the reality that I just talked about. And I think that when we really focus on a very impactful and meaningful story behind any brand, it doesn't matter if it's a service or a product, it will definitely make an impact on clients. At least like in my case, a lot of like my contracts on clients are word of mouth. So I have been able to realize that having an impactful story or a meaning behind whatever you're offering, it's key to keep moving forward.
Yeah, that's great. Joella?
Yeah, so my career is in addition to being an entrepreneur, it's also in heritage and culture, preservation and promotion up here in the Yukon. And so I actually always thought that I would pivot the other way, I guess, right? That if my consulting work died down, that I'd be able to use my soap business to kind of carry me through. So it was interesting that during the pandemic, or as soon as it hit, that all the storefronts closed, and that I thought, okay, this is okay. I'll let my soap business rest for a bit and I'll focus on this other work. But when all of the public health messages were about washing your hands and I was the provider of soap, I didn't really have that opportunity. That, and instantly within the next few months, there was promotion of, shopping local and supporting Indigenous business. And so my pivot ended up being, kind of driven on its own. I didn't really have a choice. That before the pandemic, most of my sales were in wholesale shops within the Yukon, cultural centers and that kind of thing. And I would do farmers markets and art shows and that kind of things. And my online sales was a small part. And, I joke that before the pandemic, I was still shipping orders and reused cracker boxes and that kind of thing. But instantly people started buying online, and I had to shift, my team to packaging all these orders. That we were getting hundreds of orders a day in this little town. And so I couldn't run to Staples to get boxes and tape and labels and all that kind of stuff. And so, I had to order all this stuff up and really shift that way. And so it was a totally different way of thinking, including also my social media engagement, right? And how I did that, because who my customer was absolutely changed. And so, yeah, I had gone from the place where thinking I didn't need to pivot, I'm okay, to being forced to pivot. But, so grateful. Yukon government and Yukon University provided financial resources and mentorship and kind of that technical support, because I wasn't an expert in my website and having to do so much more of that. And so to be able to have that support to drive me through and to be able to maintain it, because still today that is, my main income now is through my e-commerce site and getting all of those orders out there. And so, yeah, my back end certainly has pivoted in how I run my business.
Yeah, there was a real push to get everyone focused on e-commerce. And, if I were a panelist, I would certainly have something to say about that, but I'm the moderator, so I'll let other people speak. I'm gonna ask everyone on the panel to speak to this, because this whole pivoting thing obviously irritates me. You can tell by the look on my face and the way I ask the question. So we don't have any audience questions yet. I really want the audience to participate. So post your questions on YouTube. And Janelle, pivoting, what do you think?
Well, I don't know if you're gonna like this answer, but
That's fine.
The reality is there was no alternative to pivoting. You needed to come up with a different way. So it doesn't necessarily mean you need to change what you're selling. It may have meant that you need to change what you were selling, or your timeline for how you were selling it. Or in some instances, it was a pivot was a complete positive. Like, there was a lot of businesses where, they did very well during the pandemic. So I think the advice of pivot was the only answer you could give. Now, how empty that advice is, for every company, it was going to be very customized, and you needed to do some pretty deep thinking about, and creative thinking about, how am I and this company going to get towards where we need to be still. For us, what that looked like was, we had started building software when the pandemic hit, and we fell through most of the funding cracks because we were pre-revenue. And so our plan had been to bootstrap. We had planned an October launch in California of the product. We wanted to be in market. We didn't want to do a raise at the early stage. And so we totally had to pivot. And we did do a raise, which we're proud of having closed, because, as we know, less than 2% of women across North America receive equity investments. So we were really proud that we were able to do that during the pandemic. But were we expecting it? Is it what we originally wanted to do? No. And then same thing with how we sold. So, we changed the timeline of recognizing, okay, that we're going to use the pandemic as an opportunity for product development to catch up. Well, all of our prospective customers have basically just said, what we're selling is no longer a line item until they can secure revenues, their talent, and existing customers. And so budgets went away for what we were selling, and we just said, okay, let's focus on product and get as far ahead as we can. So it required not for us to pivot the business model or pivot what we're selling, but it did require us to change timelines, budget, probably give up shares earlier than we wanted to, and maybe not be as far along as we would like to at this point. But we're still going in the right direction. And what we had to do was for survival, and to ensure that we could get through.
Interesting. Yeah. Jen? Pivot?
So we did not pivot. We had a pretty, I think, unique situation in that we develop affordable housing. We are in the process of expanding from Saskatchewan into Alberta and into British Columbia. And within our affordable housing, we have a specific focus on housing women and children who are leaving domestic abuse situations. So COVID, and we already have a significant need in Canada for the type of housing that we develop, and COVID exacerbated an already, very significant need. So we couldn't stop. It was scary. It was, there was a lot of unknowns. We were dealing with different rules in different provinces because essential services was not the same across Canada. So I would say we more navigated than pivoted. We were pretty fortunate in that we run, us four owners, which is myself, my husband, my brother, and my sister-in-law. When we started our company, we were all like 27 and under. So we built our business really on technology, very cloud-based. And so we're very nimble. And I think that really is what allowed us to navigate. And so we did not pivot. We started business planning longer than we normally would. We had to deal with supply issues. Lumber prices hit an all-time high. Like our lumber prices increased by 300%. At the same time as banks were kind of holding back a bit and wanting to lend us money. So we didn't know if our tenants were going to be paying their rent or not before some of the programs were. So it was scary, and we navigated. We didn't pivot. But I would say that, again, without the government stepping in and providing the programs for our residents to still be able to pay their rent and things like that, we would have been in a much different situation. So and we, again, were able to complete our expansion out of province. We actually grew 72% from 2019 to 2020, and then another 80% from 2020 to 2021. So we would probably be the anomaly in that. But there was some luck for sure along the way, given the nature of our business and how we had set it up without knowing a pandemic was ever coming our way.
Wow. Andy?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people had to pivot to actually becoming entrepreneurs through the pandemic. And that was just through necessity of losing their job. So a lot of times, side hobbies or side hustles became their full-time work. And I think that there were a lot of resources for existing revenue generating businesses, but I don't think there were enough for these small ones just starting out. And with the creation of programs, even regionally, dedicated to building or sustaining women entrepreneurs, it's only going to encourage more and more women to take on these leadership roles. And I also think that as these different Canadian regions compete for business in the future, the ones that actually have these resources, because it's proven that women-owned companies or diverse companies are more successful, I can guarantee that they're going to be more successful in economic expansion.
Yeah, absolutely. I need to bottle that and start taking that with me to meetings. I agree 100%. And I just read something yesterday about the percentage of self-employed Canadians that are women is just getting higher and higher and higher. And that's something that I was saying to government throughout the pandemic. I was saying, you need to put resources, financial resources, into women's entrepreneurship, because when women lose their jobs, they will go to self-employment, not because they want to become an entrepreneur, but by necessity. I mean, you have to pay your bills somehow, right? Anyways, not a panelist. Got to move on. So we have some questions from the audience. The first one is about funding, about that 2%. Oh, we have a bunch now. That's great. So the question is, how can we actually change the funding system to better support women entrepreneurs? So we know women receive less funding, but how do we actually change it? Does anyone want to tackle that one?
I can jump in. I don't think I necessarily have the answer on how to change it, but I'll just say that there are programs out there. In previous companies, I've raised millions of dollars in capital, and depending on what you're looking to do. So if you're looking to raise money, there's funds out there and there's micro funds out there dedicated to financing underrepresented entrepreneurs. So it's about seeking those out, I think, are really important. Of course, we need tons and tons more. But I think that there are resources out there that are, dedicated to pushing different minority and different groups up through capital and financing.
Great. So this is a question specifically for Jen. Question is, what advice do you have for scaling support, and how did you grow so fast?
So advice, I would say just don't quit. I say to our leadership team and to our whole team, because we are female led and we have an entire female leadership team in the construction industry, which is very rare. We are the old boys club of old boys clubs. We have to show up more prepared. We have to do a better job. We have to be more professional. We cannot mess up. We cannot stutter. And so over the years, we just did that. We showed up more prepared, more ready, and we did a really great job every single time. And as far as growing so fast, so we're very rare in that we're female led and we are privately owned. We had some partners in the beginning, individual partners that we brought in along the way. And we spent the year of 2018 negotiating buyouts of the few partners that we had left so that we could be a fully private business. And the reason we wanted to do that was to be able to be very nimble and be able to make decisions that are aligned to our values, as we are a purpose-led company. And so I would say, making very smart financial decisions was crucial so that we had the capital to be able to do that as well as grow. I was able to utilize my finance background very strategic, be able to get to the place we are, but you have to make sacrifices. I mean, my husband and I didn't take a paycheck from our company for the first 3 years. Every single cent we make extra goes back into growing the company. Especially in the beginning, we couldn't afford fancy things and even do the things we were doing before we started our business. I was a banker and my husband was a firefighter. And especially before we had kids, I mean, we had a lovely life and we had to sacrifice basically all of it in order to start and grow our business. I would just say, don't quit, have a plan, show up, and make hard sacrifices along the way.
That's great. Whew. That's the truth. That's not like a pretty advice, but it's the truth. So this is a good one for everyone, really. In the early stages of starting your business, what was the biggest challenge you faced? So this is a question from someone who says, I'm currently in the exploratory stage, and I wonder what pitfalls I should be aware of. So early on, what was the biggest challenge? You're kind of still in the early stages, Vanessa. What challenges are you facing right now?
I think that, of course, like before even like launching your own business, it's important to have in place a business plan. And I know it sounds very basic, but there's a lot of people that doesn't even implement a business plan. And I think my current challenge right now is bringing my business plan to life and not feeling myself overwhelming with so much different information. In one day, I have different caps, like finance, I'm HR, I'm accounting, and in some of these areas I really don't have this background. So it's really finding myself knocking doors where just only one door out of 10 really answer. So I think it's keeping myself motivated on like what I have created, that I believe in that, and really not giving up on looking for the resources. Now, once it is implemented, it's actually moving forward with the next task. But organization is key. I think. And again, it sounds very basic. I think we all know about this, but I think not having a proper organization from the beginning, it will cause the mental health issues that later on starts to appear. And then with everything that the world can throw at us, having at least the basic cover will help to grow and move forward.
Yeah. Joella? Oh, you're on mute.
One of the first issues that I had was certainly having the support. So I bought my business and people were like, you're crazy. What are you doing? Do you even know how to make soap? How are you going to? So having people believe in me and see that I could do it. And of course, being a stubborn person, that just drove me to try harder and to succeed even more. But I think, similar to what Vanessa said, having a business plan, or at least that vision, whether it's guiding documents, people are into like vision boards and that kind of thing, and really trying to stay your course and not get distracted by other people's values, other people's businesses that might be similar. Stay what is unique to you, and really just focus on that and your values. I have to remember why I started my business, what my intention was, in addition to making money, but what that was, and not, follow those bright lights, I guess, and not by distracted, especially social media when there's so much, I guess, competition or people doing similar things, that really the pathway to success is when you're following your own values and building up your team and resources. That I think there is also incredible support for people wanting to help, and there's a lot out there, and that's one of the barriers, I think, is being able to try and find where those resources might be.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to just change the question a little bit for Janelle and Mandy. Both of you have been involved in multiple companies or multiple startups. So would you say that the challenges have been similar, in the early stages? Are there common challenges that you face in the early stages, or is every business, is every startup, is every experience unique?
I think that step one is validating your idea. So build an MVP, whatever that looks like, the bare minimum of what you can launch, and make sure it's something that people actually want before you invest too much time or too much money. I think that's a mistake that many people make is, and it's hard sometimes because if it's something that you really believe in and you think people will like, you want to kind of like go all in on it. But step one, the first challenge is just validating that idea.
And just in case people don't know, MVP is?
Minimum viable product. So just like I said, the very bare minimum of what you can launch, like whatever that looks like, whether it's hardware, software, a physical product, just put it out there, see what people think, see if you can sell a little bit of it, and then you can scale from there.
Yep. Fantastic. So I was going to ask Janelle, I think she is backstage for some reason. That's okay. Oh, Janelle, she's here. Hi.
Hi.
What do you think?
Yeah. So I would say that like building a company is like raising a child. I've never raised a child, but I often liken it to, the milestones or the guideposts can be similar, but the way that you raise your child is going to be different than, your neighbor or your sister and brother. And so with every company, and this is my third one, I've had different barriers and challenges. Mind you, I've gotten smarter, and the challenges that, happened in the first business or the second business have not been challenges in the third business. But yeah, I think it doesn't get easier, but I will say you get better at absorbing what I would just call the shocks, or like the lows, or any like step backs or failures, as you gain experience and as you're continuing to learn. it does just get easier to fail and learn from those fairly quickly and recognize, and it sounds very cliche, but it's very true, that when you are failing, you really are learning something that you can then apply just like an experiment, and you realize, okay, it doesn't work that way. I'm now one step closer to figuring out how this does work. So, I mean, like, you should like the pitfalls and the failures as much as the wins and the learnings, for sure.
That's great. It's true. When you're the peaks, you won't enjoy the peaks as much if you don't sort of embrace the valleys. That's been my experience. So a question here, I mean, there's a question here that I just love. It says, do you think, I wish I was a panelist. Okay. Do you think that women entrepreneurs actually lack confidence, or are the systems in place the real problem? Anyone want to tackle this one? Yeah, Jen, go.
Oh, I would love to
Go
tackle
for
this
it.
one. 100% it is the systems that we have in place. Our society has been built on a patriarchal system that supports and views all the strong traits of a white man as the golden ticket and North Star that we, all men should work towards, while women should be quiet and not have opinions and all these things. So I think every woman has a voice. I think every woman, even if she doesn't right now, has inner confidence, and society has suppressed it. And so often we're told to, be polite, be quiet, not use our opinions, because that's not the polite thing for a woman to do. And I have been in so many situations being a strong female in a very male-dominated industry, where if I walk in with a strong opinion and, confidence, or I say something a certain way, it's taken so negatively, versus if a man says that exact same thing in the exact same way, he's powerful and strong. Where men are strategic, women are calculated, and there's all these things. So 100%, I think that we are penalized for carrying the very strengths that men have used to gain success for hundreds of years.
It's no secret that I agree with you 100%. Vanessa?
Yeah, it's just a very small comment. I 100% agree, and especially coming on my perspective as young woman and immigrant, like English is my second language, so I have definitely been discriminated in places where if I don't talk in a proper way, or if just the fact that I'm young and female, that just puts me on a lower level, that I have to give my 1,000% to whatever is that I'm doing. So I think that it's definitely the system, and I can agree with you, Jen. We all have insecurities. I think that that's part of our nature being, but it's definitely implemented by society, and also social media can be very dangerous if it's not applied the proper way.
Yeah, that's a great point. Mandy?
I could talk on this topic forever. I can't even tell you how many times I've been in board meetings and meetings in general where I'm the only female there, or I'm the only one with lots of tattoos, or I'm quite visibly gay, and I'm silenced almost. And so I've learned to be louder than the rest, which is unfortunate, but it's just our society. But the good thing about this is that women are used to working that much harder and smarter than men. So when you're feeling defeated, know that you had to climb so many more hurdles than those Zuckerberg types, and just like give yourself a high five for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Joella? Oh, I think you're muted.
There we go. Yeah, I mean, Indigenous women are some of the most fiercest, confident, badass women around, but these systems that are in place that provide barriers, especially around access to capital, are so huge. I mean, just that there is an absence of Indigenous women in lending roles and financial institutions, and that there isn't the cultural awareness of some of these organizations and governments that are there to support us, that leads to a barrier there. And the Indian Act and how it's set up, mostly in southern Canada, really poses those barriers. And so, like Mandy said, having to work extra harder and learn to navigate the system in a whole other language within this system that's really been meant to oppress has been really difficult. But we see, Indigenous women entrepreneurs certainly on the rise, and more so during the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great segue into this question. So I'm going to ask this question to the whole panel. I think it's a really important question. So I thank whoever from the audience asked this question. And it is, so what do you think we can do that ensures that those of us with privilege can pull marginalized women up with us? So I'm sorry, I'm stumbling all over this. What do you think we can do that ensures that those of us with privilege can pull marginalized women up with us, so we all work together and take up our own space together in work and in community? Vanessa?
Yeah, I think that, well, there may be multiple answers to this, but I think having an inclusive environment, if you have an organization, even at your workplace, whether you work for someone or you have your own company, really take into consideration that diversity, especially within women, it's key. Learning from different perspectives. Everybody, like, something that I love about Canada is how many immigrants are here, how many newcomers, and even if you're not an immigrant, your parents or your grandparents probably immigrated to this country. So there's so many different perspectives out there, and I think having a very inclusive environment will start a change.
That's great. Mandy?
I think talking about it every chance you get is very important. Like I very much try to the best of my ability to acknowledge my privilege, being white, growing up in Canada, being English speaking, growing up in a 2-parent household. The list goes on. And I think that it's up to us, the ones that have that privilege, to keep fighting for more resources and to keep fighting for more programs for those that don't. Hiring with diversity in mind. There's so many things that we can be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else? Yeah, Jen.
So I share the same sentiment. We very much acknowledge at our company and within our ownership group that we carry a significant amount of privilege. Same thing, we're Caucasian, born and raised in Canada, English is a first language. We've been fortunate enough, even as a female-led organization, to break through some barriers. And so every opportunity we can use our platform to create social and community change for others who maybe can't use their voice yet, we take that opportunity. So we ruffle a lot of feathers, especially with government in our very conservative province that we operate in. Within Avana, we have a significant focus on BIPOC and inclusion. We have work programs. So just yesterday, we had 3 ladies who currently reside at the YWCA start an 8-week work term with Avana. We're about to launch an internship program. So, and it's all focused around diversity and inclusion. So it's really, if you're able to create strength within your own platform and get to use your voice in a way maybe some others aren't able to or don't have that strength yet to do so, we very much feel like we owe it back to the community to do so. So it's just, I guess, through programming, through specific requirements of inclusion and diversity, and then using our voice. And we're like a nightmare to the very conservative old boys club population where we exist. You could ask anybody in our community and they, but it's necessary, and we've seen progress by doing it. So it's now fun, but it's also scary to do. But when you start seeing progress, and even within our own organization, the diversity that exists, it just makes you so much stronger and a way more beautiful place to work.
Yeah, that's amazing. My goal is always for government, elected officials and policymakers to kind of shudder when they see my name on their daily agenda and say, oh, got a call with CanWCC. That's going to be a rough one. Does anyone else have any comments on this question? Yeah. Joella, you're on mute. I know. I always forget.
That's okay. I'm not quite sure what's happening, but anyway, it's I guess just to kind of like wrap it up, it's about really creating like this diverse innovation ecosystem, and at the heart of that, I guess, is really just being like open to listening and learning and growing your business and your path that way. And one of my mentors, Tara Fraser, who's an Indigenous woman-owned airline out of BC, one of her phrases that she always talks about is that co-creating the conditions for Indigenous women entrepreneurs to thrive is the most natural, swift, and effective pathway to economic reconciliation in our country.
That's amazing. So, anyone else? I think it's about time for us to sort of wrap things up. We're wrapping a little bit early, but it's always good to have a little extra time in the afternoon. I do want to hear everyone's final thoughts. Just anything you want to share with the participants about your experiences, not even over the last 2 years necessarily, just in general, your experiences, your advice, whatever you wish to share. Final thoughts. I'll start with you, Janelle.
Yeah, I think like a few things I didn't touch on, but maybe I will now. I definitely believe that we still all operate in an old boys club of how business has always been done, how sales happen, how relationships and appointments happen, and how funding moves through to women ventures. And specifically, where I'm in technology, and we saw over the last few years, technology positions with women, female leaders has continued to decline. And it's so disheartening to see that investments are strategically being put into female-owned businesses for women to enter into technology and the trades, and to see those numbers decline while those investments are being made. So it tells me that we can keep putting money into it, but it's broken. The system's not working, and the programs we've put in place are still not working. So we can point to, the women's fund that's been created, or we can applaud the next investment fund that's been set up to support women, but we're still running them in the exact same way. We're still making decisions, approvals, asking the same questions, expecting the same silly pitches. And I think until we're ready to really challenge through a women's lens and perspective, how we arrive at positions of influence, power, decision-making, how we're making those decisions, then it's not going to change, and we can keep funneling money to fix the problem. But clearly, with less money going into equity and women-owned companies that actually are founded by a woman CEO is declining, it tells me that it's broken and it's not working. And so my final thoughts are, any one of us who continue to have a platform, I think for some of our funders maybe, or even people who are on my social accounts, are probably getting tired of hearing me speak about it. But I am a person in a position of privilege who is proud for the companies that I've been able to have, and I've been fortunate to have been able to lead them. And I think if we can start to make change just by talking about how it's not working still, and get some attention to it, then hopefully we can start to make change.
Absolutely. I think that's such a great point. And if people, I always say, if you're tired of hearing me talk about it, then fix it, because I'm not going to stop talking about it until it's fixed. I love that. Jen, do you want to share some final thoughts?
Yeah, this was great conversation. I just want to thank you for having me. And I guess my final thoughts would be, you know, when I started my business almost 8 years ago, I felt like I was at a strong disadvantage being female led in the industry that I was in. Fast forward 8 years, I now feel like I'm at a bit of an advantage. We're so rare, women, and we do a better job in a lot of situations. Companies that are diverse, female led or diverse led in the leadership team tend to statistically do better. So the stats are there. We just need more women to take that plunge, to take that step, to believe in themselves. Nobody's going to believe in you if you don't believe in yourself. Being an entrepreneur, you do need to sell yourself. And so I hope to see many more women-led businesses. And again, things have come a long way in the last decade. There are more resources available. So I would just ask anybody listening, thinking of taking that next step, to really believe in yourself and lean into your goals and your ambitions, because you'll be amazed what you can actually accomplish once you truly believe in yourself.
I love it. Vanessa, final thoughts?
Well, again, thank you. It was lovely to meet all of you. All of you have a piece of inspiration in me now. And I think, like, as a final thought, I would like to remind, especially young females, and especially, or if you are just in a different place, to make sure to have an adaptable mind, not only an adaptable personality. And a little tip that has served me and through how my personal life and now through my businesses is, having like a traveler mentality. When I immigrated to Canada, I didn't have a huge culture shock. Was looking at my life like, I'm just forever traveling, and that really helped me to adapt. So nowadays, in a business perspective, I don't have a huge issue on adapting to a different situation. So adaptability is key, and having a strong why. It doesn't matter if it's part of your brand, but having a personal strong why, like, why would you wake up every day? It doesn't matter how you feel, doesn't matter what's going on in your world. So you are able to, like, again, move forward. So adaptability and a big why, and thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Vanessa. Vanessa's a CanWCC member, so I know her really well. She's just great. Joella.
Yeah, so I never ever dreamt of being a soap maker. I wanted to be an employer that helped connect people to culture and land and language, and helped build confidence. And soap making really just ended up being the tool to do that. But I guess, in closing, just want to say, like, for too long, Indigenous women have felt like that this system was never designed for them to fit into. And Indigenous women are so powerful and already possess that knowledge and that's needed to support Indigenous women's entrepreneurship. And so really going forward, the inclusive innovation system needs to give the time, space, and resources to make actionable changes in the current entrepreneurial system. So again, like, such an honor to be here with all of these panelists, and thank you to Startup Canada.
Fantastic. And Mandy, final thoughts?
Yeah, I think that this entire conversation has been surrounded by how entrepreneurship is harder for women, and it is. And I don't think in our lifetime we're actually going to see a day where these conversations aren't needed, unfortunately. But I know that I'm going to keep doing my part to keep fighting for more resources, for more programs, so that the next generations don't have to. And I know that all of these women and many, many out there are with me on that. And I think the best piece of advice I can give through, my decade plus of entrepreneurship is just to ask and don't apologize. So ask for what you want. Don't apologize for taking what you deserve. And yeah, thank you so much for having me here. It's been a really great conversation that is very important.
Fantastic. Thank you so much to all of the panelists and of course to Startup Canada for providing this space for this event to and of course for us to have this very important conversation. I will indulge myself and share this final thought. I am seeing more and more the word inclusive tacked on to all sorts of things. You know, the inclusive economy, the inclusive future, the inclusive blank. And words are important. And I really want to make sure that, inclusive means something. And so all of the panels and committees and everything I'm on, I would encourage everybody, when you see the word inclusive, ask questions. How is this project inclusive? How is this program inclusive? That's what I would say, because the economy isn't inclusive unless a lot of inequalities are addressed and actually fixed. You can't just tack on the word inclusive and that fixes everything. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to turn it over to Kayla. And thank you so much, Kayla.
Thank you, Nancy. Thank you to all of our panelists, Nancy, for leading that engaging conversation and tackling some challenging questions that we received. You know, I often find myself in this, cheerleader, positive mode, glass half full for anybody who knows me. And at Startup Canada, we have an all-woman team, a woman CEO, woman board chair, but that really is a drop in the ocean. And we need to approach these conversations sometimes from a more somber perspective, that it is incredibly challenging. And there are still, there is a lack of inclusivity. And what does it mean around language? What, changes are we actually seeing? We need to continue making these noises, but we need to see things change. So I really appreciate Nancy always unapologetically bringing this to the forefront of government, to private sector, to various partners in the ecosystem, and to all of these panelists for navigating these challenging conversations and continuing to make this noise, even though it can be exhausting and it can be deflating often that we're continuously having these conversations around barriers. But I think we need to continue to elevate these perspectives, to be inclusive in the way that we deliver programming, to do so by organizations that are led by women for women, or led by Indigenous entrepreneurs for Indigenous entrepreneurs, and for, beyond just the women's conversation. We need to be building the systems by the people that they're intending to serve. And that's a big challenge that I have to other support organizations, to other groups like Startup Canada. How can we as these entities be accountable to that? So I love Nancy's point around making sure people are actually walking the walk and not just tacking on various language pieces because it's being spoken to in the news and is more topical. So Nancy, I always appreciate that perspective that you bring and that challenge that is at the front of my brain now. I want to also make a challenge to our listeners and our viewers today. We've talked a lot about power and the power that many of us have using our voices. You also have a lot of purchasing power to support other women-led businesses, using the internet to identify where you can find women-led organizations, those from underrepresented founders. Using your money to support those entrepreneurs is a very simple thing that you can do to elevate those businesses and support those entrepreneurs in your local communities and across Canada. So there's your challenge for the day when you're starting your holiday shopping early with all these supply chain challenges. I want to thank Nancy, thank the panelists, and also thank our incredible partners for today. Thank you to our co-presenting partners, UPS, Intuit QuickBooks, and our national partners, MasterCard, BDC, and the Trade Commissioner Service. community partners, Scotiabank, Google, NACA, and the Village Hive, and our event partner, Magnet. This program, these conversations, and all of the support that we offer from Startup Canada to various women entrepreneurs and beyond would not be possible without those incredible partners at the helm. And for those entrepreneurs and business leaders who are listening here today as well, I wanted to share some details around the Magnet Student Work Placement Program, which provides employers with wage subsidies to hire post-secondary students for paid work experiences. We were talking about entrepreneurship out of necessity. We didn't really cover youth during today's session, but this is a great opportunity through the Outcome Campus Connect program, where employers can apply for these subsidies, connect with over 1 million students from over 100 post-secondary schools across Canada, all for free, to really support these various students. So you can visit swpp.magnet.today for more information. And thank you, Magnet, for being our event partner today. Last but not least, I want to pass the virtual screen over to our friend Kate Karn, who is the Manager of Public Policy at MasterCard, for some final remarks. Kate, over to you.
Thanks, Kayla, and thank you to today's incredible panelists for bringing your perspectives this afternoon. I know I'm feeling incredibly energized after the discussion, and I expect the audience across the internet is feeling the same. Having the opportunity to listen to and support entrepreneurs like you is why MasterCard has been so proud to partner with Startup Canada for the last 5 years. We look forward to further conversations during Small Business Week. I'm going to put in a little plug for tomorrow's International Perspectives event, which will feature insights from the MasterCard Index of Women Entrepreneurs. I hope everybody can join for that. In the meantime, thank you everyone for joining us today and wishing you a wonderful day ahead. Thank you.